How's it going? All right. Thank you all for this. This is awesome. Thanks to David for being here.
Yeah.
We're about to do something fun, which is talk about something funny in order to understand something serious. We're going to talk about insight, how you get it, how it's developed, how you make yourself more of the kind of person who can find it, maybe even on a regular schedule, like this poor guy, whose job it is to publish at least 3 cartoons every week. So before we get started, I want to show you guys the site where he publishes. He's on the LA Times. I think we can pull up the URL here. Yep,
Yeah,
there it
we're
is.
there.
So if you scroll down, you'll see one of his recent cartoons. And here it comes.
Here it
If
comes
you
very
scroll
slowly.
down, there it is.
There's the cartoon.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll let you guys read that for a second. This is a current event, I think, right? Right, David?
Exactly. Yeah. This was just too good a subject to avoid.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to do it in a way that, because I think what Schultz is trying to do is a very worthy thing. We do need a conversation in this country, many conversations about race and how we make this a better country. But I just thought this may be a difficult task to take on in between shots of cappuccino. And so anyway, I came up with that. I imagined, I don't think this guy actually buys his coffee at Starbucks. He's more a Dunkin' Donuts guy. But it worked for the cartoon.
So the other thing you'll notice in this URL, David is the only political cartoonist in America who also writes columns with each of his cartoons. That's just take the typical work and double it, and it's 2 different media that you have to deal with,
right.
and so we'll get to some of that. So I asked David to pick a few cartoons that we could study here, kind of workshop and deconstruct how he arrived at the insight that is embedded within each cartoon. And you'll see that they take a lot of different forms. The art of editorial cartooning is pretty diverse. So without further ado.
All right, let's see. There's a
Exhibit
cartoon.
A.
Yeah. And again, you can read this.
It's a pretty short read.
Yeah, trust me. Yeah.
So, and we're going to be asking this about each cartoon that we're going to talk about here. How did you, let's say, there's an insight here, there's an insight that you had to mine and put into a cartoon. What was the first step to this? How did this happen?
Yeah, well, this is kind of a classic editorial cartoon. Some of the cartoons I'm going to show you have a different format or a different approach, but this is the way people have been doing it since Thomas Nast, and you set a scene and go after a big target. Every cartoon, it depends on, I could go way back to where they start, but let's simplify this one that really began, obviously, with the issue of Wall Street firms bringing down the U.S. economy, and it's still coming out very well. And I can't remember this. It was probably a specific news event around this cartoon. There usually is. It's usually tied to what people are talking about in the news. And so my job really, every time I do a cartoon, is to take some big issue, some hot issues, usually very complex issue, and distill it down to some essence. And I'm often looking for that visual metaphor that will tell the story without me saying very much. And so I thought portraying Goldman Sachs as a pirate was a pretty apt metaphor. It actually, and I think it inspired a little bit by, because I read constantly, I'm sort of expected to know a little bit about everything in the world that happens, which is kind of a big job. But because of that, I read broadly. And I remember after the fall of the Soviet Union, the way Russia developed capitalism was the way communists used to describe capitalism in Russia, which was piracy. And capitalism can be piracy if it's simply people out for themselves to get as much money as they can and screw over everybody else. So that's essentially what this cartoon is about.
So with your particular genre of insight, humor is clearly a component. How important to you is the laugh in each cartoon?
Yeah. Well, I don't consider myself a great humorist. I tried one night, I tried stand-up, and it didn't work out really well. I wasn't dirty enough. No. So the humor usually just grows out of the irony of the situation or the absurdity of the situation. It's important simply because humor is subversive. People love cartoons, and they're drawn to cartoons, and that's why it's a really powerful piece to have in a website. When I joined the LA Times, within a month, my cartoons were the top search for item on latimes.com, which only marginally, I think, had to do with me being a genius. It was mostly because it was like, wow, they're cartoons. And so if you can make it funny in some way, it's kind of insidious. It gets in people's heads, even if they disagree with it. Yeah. It sticks there. It's like, dang, that was pretty funny. I mean, one of my favorite cartoonists is a guy I totally disagree with politically, Michael Ramirez. He was actually my predecessor at the LA Times, but he gets me all the time because I think that's really funny or clever or smart.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that creative people who have to dig up and develop insights worry about is, how do you stand out? How do you develop a voice? In the writing world, as you know, that's a huge concern. Just what is my voice? What does that even mean? How do I find it? How do I use it? How do you make sure that you're not telling the same joke as the editorial cartoonist in, Poughkeepsie or New York?
Well, that happens constantly with all editorial cartoonists in this country, because they're usually, especially with a prominent issue, there are just certain elements that, we've got Mitch McConnell and Barack Obama doing something. There's some news event, and usually the first idea that pops into my head, I figure somebody else has thought that one already.
So you cross it off right there.
Sometimes. Depends on if I've got a second idea.
Right.
But usually there's a second idea, and usually the third idea is the good one. But yeah, there's in many situations there are just very obvious ideas that somebody else is going to be doing. So and the longer I've done this, I've done this for a long time, and I now find myself, there are many issues that come back around over and over again. I've literally had moments where I've thought of a great cartoon idea and kind of started in on it, and then I realized, I actually did this 10 years ago. And then I have to, the choice is, do I start over, or is this sort of a reprise?
Yes.
But
yes.
yeah, so it depends on the day.
All right, so with that, let's move on to cartoon numero dos.
Yeah, this cartoon got a lot of response, I think, for the obvious reason that people, well, you all have been doing this all day, I'll just say that. This is the new stance for human beings. It's like this. And I can't remember exactly if there was a news event that inspired this, but it was just that observational thing of noting how I'm doing this, everybody's walking around staring at the screen in their hands, and that it is really, truly an evolution in a strange way. So this is once I kind of hit on that idea, this was a cartoon that was pretty easy to put together. But part of it is that...
What did you get to first? Was it the evolution of man, sort of, image, or what came first?
I think what hit me first was just that observation of, we're all doing this now. Yeah. Then, pretty quickly after that, because it's about how we stand and everything, I was immediately reminded of these ubiquitous, this progression of the species. They're everywhere. The problem with that is there have been a million cartoons using this device.
Yeah.
So then it's like, the trick then is to figure out some way to do it in a fresh way. And it can either just be another stupid cliche, or if you just figure out the right twist on it. And I think the twist itself was that this observation of this is what we do now. But also then, in terms of the image, it was rather than actually making it literally, Homo sapiens and Homo erectus and working back, but like putting this guy in a museum. It's like he's walking through a museum, it's like just happened to be, if you were a photographer, caught the right moment when this guy was walking by this mural. And that's what I try to do with a lot of the cartoons. They're almost like just snapshots or just a scene from a movie. Yeah. It's like, this is a moment.
And maybe that makes it easier to recognize.
Right, because constantly my priority is actually communicating my ideas. It's got to be, I don't want to just talk to myself. I want to talk to as many people as I can. And sometimes, I still do this. Sometimes I do a cartoon that I think is really clever, and sometimes they're just too clever because nobody gets it, except me. So it's always judging what is my audience, what are my readers, what do they know, what will they get, how can I make it new and different enough, but still readable.
So you mentioned you've been doing this a long time, and I did a little math. Your first cartoon was in 1970, and I don't want to scare you, but that is 45 years.
I know, that's
45 years of cartooning. So
I was 12.
You were 12. What was your first cartoon? I believe it was for the UW
Actually,
Daily.
yeah,
Tell us about
I
that.
just started at the University of Washington, and actually, my career started in a weight training class. When I was a freshman in college, I weighed approximately 60 pounds less than I do now, and I'm not really obese. So I took this weight training class because I wanted to bulk up, and I ended up sitting there drawing a caricature of the teacher, and he noticed, unfortunately, and he's a very big, hulking guy, and came over and said, "What are you doing?" And it's like, I thought, I'm about to have a dumbbell stuffed up my something. But instead he said, "Oh, that's really cool," and said, "You ought to go to the Daily," which is a student paper, and see if they want cartoons. So I did. And so my audition was to draw a picture of Richard Nixon, actually, a cartoon. And actually the editor thought it would look nothing like him, but he kept me on. So luckily, otherwise, who knows what I'd be doing.
So Richard Nixon. And how would you say in that time that your cartooning has grown, evolved, changed?
Yeah, well, there's sort of two levels. The art has evolved. At that point, I was kind of a really good high school level cartoonist. But just through the process of having this audience of university students forced me to understand, okay, that idea of, you got to communicate. You've got an audience, use it and interact and make sure they know what you're talking about. So by the time I graduated from college, I was pretty near professional, and I developed my drawing style. But I think the biggest evolution has been, it continues right now. I within a few years, had a pretty recognizable style that was my own. I borrowed from a lot of different cartoonists. Ron Cobb, who at the time I was in college was an underground political cartoonist, and went on to design the characters for Star Wars and for Alien. He was brilliant, and I learned a lot from him. But anyway, it hit a point where my style was pretty much established, but sort of the reason I did it has continued to evolve. You know, when I started, it was like just to get something done, and the typical, and I'm not sure a lot of cartoonists don't get out of this. You're just trying to make a joke about the news, which is okay, but it doesn't mean much. And I've gotten more convinced of what I believe, and more convinced that the reason I do this is to try to engage my readers and to say something, and in some tiny little way just nudge the universe in, a millimeter or a centimeter closer to the good side. Martin Luther King talked about the arc of justice being long and bending toward the arc of history.
Bend toward justice?
History.
Something bends toward justice, right?
Yes, the arc of history. Or something.
Universe, I
or the universe? Noah's Ark bends toward, I don't know, there's an arc in there.
Yeah.
Sorry, I tried to get too elaborate. Anyway, I'm trying to help the bend.
Right.
Yeah, get around the bend.
Sometimes the message is, one panel delivered, pretty directly, or the metaphor, Goldman Sachs is a pirate, pretty direct. Yeah. Sometimes it takes a little time, and you kind of break it down. So this cartoon I've actually broken up into several slides, so follow along if you will.
So I can read this to you. Somewhere in Oklahoma, Supreme Court's opened the way for gay marriage around here. Yep. Want to get hitched? Reckon so.
All right. So tell us how that message and what was the first step to that insight?
Well, I think the first step was going to watch Brokeback Mountain. I mean, in a way, I thought of it, but there are always a number of elements that go into it. So that movie I loved. It's in my head. This was a moment when there was a Supreme Court ruling upholding the lower court rulings for, I think there are 6 states, most of them in the Midwest, saying that gay marriage is legal. And I was, so with Oklahoma itself in mind, and I'm kind of into cowboys, you might notice. Because I go to Montana every year, ride horses, and so I know that world. I know all these cowboys and ranchers, and we can think of them as sort of a cliche, and I wanted to sort of deal with this and go against the expectation. And then I wanted to pace it sort of like a movie that, if you're reading this, you got 2 panels there that nothing's going on except them writing. And then with the conclusion, not only going against what you might expect these cowboys to be saying, but also to make it, the way they say it is like, this is really no big deal.
Not a big deal, yeah.
Yeah, so that's ultimately the message. It's like, why have we been so crazy about this for the last few thousand years?
So how do you know that a cartoon has delivered the message you want and that it's had the impact you want? What's your impact metric? And what do you take away from whether it did or didn't work?
Yeah. In the past, there weren't many metrics. It would just be sort of response from readers writing letters in or phone calls. And I had the sense that these were popular things, but when newspapers started running into trouble after Craigslist killed off the newspaper industry. Sorry, I had to do that. There were a lot of cartoonists who were the first ones fired. And cartoonists have always contended, people like this stuff. You've got a newspaper you're trying to sell. But luckily, the online world has created a metric. So one way I know is how many page views. And I know exactly how many people are seeing this. So if that spikes, that tells me something. But also, actually, I use Facebook a lot for a metric because it's people who are very, I've got about 35,000 people that follow me on Facebook. And I can watch those numbers just click. I mean, what's interests me is as soon as I post a cartoon on my Facebook page, within seconds there's like ping, ping. And I'm thinking, what are these people doing with their lives? They're just waiting. But anyway, I can tell which ones really blow up, which ones get shared,
can there be a popular cartoon that you don't actually think delivered the message? Or do you know what I mean? Do you go into the page views and the shares to see, well, what are people saying? How does that work?
Well, no, what I have found is the ones that kind of really seem to take off are the ones where I'm kind of being more Rush Limbaugh-y. Rush Limbaugh-y?
Define Rush Limbaugh-y.
Well, it's just you're over the top. I'm just and actually, it's cartoons I do of Rush Limbaugh that really are popular. Because the ones I like are the ones that are a little more subtle or kind of not so slamming you over the head with the message. But apparently slamming you over the head with the message is really popular because it's kind of the new ethic with cable news and talk radio. And so I know if I really want to get a lot of clicks and attention, I could just do Rush Limbaugh every day, but I don't really want to do that.
Why? Why would you say that you don't?
I'm not saying much if I'm saying Rush Limbaugh is an idiot.
If you just go for the same loud screaming topics,
yeah.
what are you really
I'm trying to, over time, cumulatively with all the cartoons I do, I'm trying to say something a little broader, a little deeper that leads me to the conclusion that Rush Limbaugh is an idiot.
So another...
And all you Rush Limbaugh fans, sorry.
Takers? No. So this next cartoon is also complex. It's a single panel, and there's... I'm probably saying too much at this point, but there are two... Whatever, I'm just going to let you know.
Yeah,
Ready?
I'm intrigued. What is this?
And go.
Oh, that one, yeah. Yeah, this is one that I won't even ask you to... What I like about this cartoon, and it's one where I really wanted to deal with...
Can you tell? I think people might have...
What?
I think this one had an impact. I just heard everybody... I think people are still looking at it.
Oh, okay. I'll let you read it.
No.
Oh,
I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted
Oh.
to point out there's the impact metric at the event.
Well, just structurally, one thing
That
I
kind
like
of
about
struck.
this is that it works. You don't actually have to read all that stuff to get it. The image of a board game, everybody knows. So you look at this and you say, hey, there's a board game, and one person has to go one direction, and another person has a much more complex way to go. So, you don't even have to read all that. But this is one where I guess I wanted to make sure, because I know there are a lot of people in our country who would say, oh, come on. I'm so tired of talking about race. I'm tired of, we fixed it all in 1965, and so let's just all pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and get on with it. And so this is trying to illustrate why maybe we're not quite there yet, that history does matter. That there's a lot of background to why someone might be struggling more than another person. I was talking with a guy recently, explaining to him, talking to this white male about white male privilege, and he didn't really like the idea very well. And I told him, and I thought this was a great concept, because I've had a fabulously lucky life, and I've taken advantage of opportunities I've had. I mean, my parents weren't rich, but other than that, it's all gone pretty well. And I feel like the privileges I've had, whether or not you like that word, give me a great responsibility, and I like that responsibility. And so this cartoon is part of that responsibility, that is to take what I've got and to pick the right side and try to explain to the people who read my stuff, why I believe what I believe and why they should believe what I believe. Right. Not quite like that.
I like the contrast for all you guys between how you reacted to this cartoon and how you reacted to the last one. The last one was laughter, and this one I just heard gasps.
Yes, that's why when people always think cartoons, humor, and political cartoons are not about the humor. They're about making a point. Humor is very often the best tool you have, but not always.
Not always.
And I guess there's sort of an awkward humor in this, with this guy saying, "Are you just slow or what?" But it's not exactly a laugh out loud one.
No. All right, so let's move on to the next one here. Do you want to read this one too, just to make sure everybody's on the same page?
So can you guys all see it
maybe
there?
you can,
Yeah. So this is the house of corporate PACs. This was a Halloween cartoon last year. The little guy there represents the political class, the kid with the vote for me sign. And these kids are saying, they give tons of candy, but only if you sell them your soul for all eternity. This one, I picked this one out because, well, for a lot of reasons. I love the artwork, and I really got into the artwork and playing with the shadows and everything. But when I was done with this, I didn't like I wasn't sold on the words. And I'm still not sold on the words. When I read them, I kind of tripped over some of the words. And so I guess the point is that, for one, I'm seldom totally satisfied with anything I do. I always feel like if I'd had more time, I could have just done one more thing or done something. And I think this is a perfectly fine cartoon, and a lot of people love it. But there's just something about it I wish I could have found maybe a just different way to say it that would have really made it strong. I think partly because I'm so happy with the art. I didn't know if the words worked right, but whether or not they do, it's fine. The fact is, I've got to do at least 3 of these a week and then write a column to go with it. I don't have time. At some point, I just have to say, it's done. We got to go. It's got to be published. And actually, as far as my cartoons go, this is a pretty good one. I do a lot of mediocre stuff. And the great thing I learned long ago is that people don't remember that. They remember that's the one they cut out of the newspaper and stuck on their refrigerator, or the one they pulled from the website and sent to all their friends. And so I get this great credit for being a genius just for that one cartoon, not for the 20 that were, okay. Luckily, I've done it long enough, I can always do an okay cartoon. And I think that's true of probably any sort of creative project. You just have to, at some point, say, this is over, and it's time to do the next one. I compare what I do, it's sort of like improvisational jazz. You play a riff, and sometimes it's brilliant, and sometimes you hit some wrong notes, but it's gone. And you just move on to the next line of music.
Yeah, and struggle is just part of it. Struggle is just part of the creative process.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how long you do it if you want to do it well.
Well, plus
the
you
struggle's
can't
always there.
wait for that perfect idea.
Yeah.
I literally wake up almost every morning. My first thought is, what am I going to do? Or what's today's idea? Or what am I going to do today? And then I start searching for it. And some days there's something great there, and other days there isn't. But that doesn't mean I can go back to bed. Yeah. I've got to churn something out. And I don't, at least the way my creativity works, I feel like I almost have to, there are all these things in my head. I've got to, if I don't get the really kind of lame ideas out, the really good ones, it's like there's this lineup, and no one's going to break a line. So you just do what's there that day.
So speaking of that,
Yeah.
this is the last one we'll show you guys.
Ah, yes.
This is a little different. This might be worth reading.
Right.
Can you?
Yeah, well, and the words don't matter a whole lot. Let me first tell you about this. So a couple weeks ago, I was on a civil rights pilgrimage in the Deep South with a group of students from the University of Washington and Utah State University and Bellevue College. And we were going to civil rights sites all around actually 4 different states, which I compared to going to, it was a tour of crime scenes. But every day was packed with seeing things and talking to people who'd been active in the civil rights movement. And I had planned to do, my cartoons and columns, and I quickly realized I had 0 time to do the cartoons the usual way. And if you look at my cartoons, they're pretty finished. I do the color, and I try to make everything just right, and I didn't have time. So it was like, after my initial panic, I realized I just have to work with what I've got. And so these are sketches. The one on the church there is where Jesse Jackson and Eric Holder and anyway, sort of the important guests for the Selma commemoration. Yeah, I guess I didn't say that. The crowning, the end of this trip was at the 50th anniversary of the Selma March in Selma. So anyway, this was that day when they were all meeting inside. There were thousands of people outside, so it was kind of this contrast of the insiders, outsiders. So I just drew the church, and then the other one is the view. President Obama was there the day before to give a speech before a crowd that was estimated between 50 and 100,000. I don't know why they can't count a little more closely. But anyway, thousands of people. And I realized, as I'm pretty tall, so I could kind of see his little head there. But I realized most people are not as tall as I am. So this is what they saw to see. So it was just an observational thing. And so this was a case where the art had to just totally be different than what I usually do. It's not a cartoon making a big statement. The writing I did really drove the whole thing, delivered the message. But I kind of like how it came out. I actually just took my iPhone, took a picture of the pages, and just the way it was lit. The top part was a little darker because the lamp was closer to the lower part. But it kind of filled in the sky, so that was serendipitous. So it was kind of this like desperation. It was really a great creative moment that was born out of panic and desperation and having no alternative, because this was the only tool I had at that point.
Well, with that, I want to thank David Horsey so much. This was awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great to talk to you.